This is a reflection on the parable of the workers in the vineyard, which we heard read a few minutes ago. And it's a parable that, like last week's, is unique to the Gospel of Matthew. And it won't be a surprise to you if you heard my reflection last week, to know that I'm going to resist the attempt to treat this parable as an allegory, something that points to something else, where in the traditional allegorical interpretation, the landowner is understood to be God. The workers who toiled all day are interpreted as the Jews or Israel, the Gentiles, no, not the Gentiles, the Jews or the Pharisees, and the workers who came late to the vineyard are thought to be representing the Gentiles. But I think that's altogether too easy an understanding, and I don't think it's necessarily correct. The argument is that God creates all equally. The Jews or the disciples of Jesus or the Gentiles won't be treated any more favorably in the kingdom of heaven than the Gentiles. And I think we have to be even more suspicious about allegories if they favor or appear to favor Christians over Jews. So I'm going to read the parable and reflect on it with you in a different way, which I think gets us closer to the truth. The truth both for the first disciples and perhaps also for us today. So what do we learn about the kingdom of heaven? Let's first consider the workers who had worked all day long, who had, in the words of the parable, borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. It's not hard to identify with their reaction, is it? We've been here since 6 a.m, working our backs off. We're exhausted. We've filled baskets and baskets of grapes. And now you've made us wait right until last to get paid. And to cap it off, you've paid us for 9 hours, just the same as those who haven't even broken into a sweat. Where's the justice in that? Why wouldn't we, tomorrow, just show up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and get a full day's pay? And the landowner replies, "But didn't I do what I promised and paid you a denarius for the day? Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? Envious because of someone else's generosity." Yes, we can relate to that too, can't we? When everything seems to go well for others, but not for me. Life's so unfair, isn't it? I never win the jackpot. As an investor, everyone else seems to be making money, but I always seem to pick the losers. I've worked so hard all my life. Don't I deserve better? Is this all there is? And what about the workers who were hired late in the day and only worked for an hour? The landowner asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" And they shot back, "Because no one has hired us." The The marketplace in those days was a bit like a labor exchange. The day workers were often worse off than slaves or servants who were otherwise employed in the household and fed by the household. But if the day workers weren't hired, there was no income, no food for them or their families. So they just stood in the marketplace all day waiting to be hired. Why should we feel bad that they got hired late in the day and yet received a full day's pay when no work would have meant no pay and no food? Were they less deserving than us because they were less qualified to work than we were, or less well educated, or couldn't speak the language, or had just served time in jail, or looked as if they were sleeping on the streets? Or might we instead commend the landowner for taking them into the vineyard late in the day and paying them a minimum wage? Wasn't that an act of compassion, generosity that we should all celebrate? We already have jobs in the vineyard. Why would we begrudge others who have waited all day long for the same opportunities? Can't we all take pleasure in their surprise and delight? Well then, what about the landowner? Yes, it's easy to see why some would want to interpret him as God. He does show compassion, he does show generosity. More by paying the latecomers, more than they would have expected. He pays them all the same, right? No higher pay for seniority or age or experience. But as so often, the allegory seems to break down because in two respects our landowner reveals very ungodlike qualities. One might be viewed as a certain naivety. Do you remember those wonderful words from Psalm 139? You have searched me, O Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. The psalmist sings of a God who, even before a word is on my tongue, knows it completely. If we understand the landowner as God, wouldn't he have known the dissension that his actions would cause, how unjust or offensive they would seem to those who had toiled all day? That type of intentional divisiveness doesn't sound like the kingdom of heaven, does it? Or even, for that matter, like a God of unconditional love. And second, isn't there something rather gratuitous, some might say vicious, in the way that the landowner reveals equality in the faces of the first in, last out workers, by paying the last ones first and then going on to pay the first last. The landowner wanted his actions to be known by all. Did he need to rub their noses in it in such a public way? And that was sure to provoke anger and envy. And when challenged, doesn't the wealthy landowner's answer, "I'm only doing what I said I would, it's my money anyway, and I can do what I like with it," doesn't it sound downright arrogant and disempowering compared with the poverty of the day workers? So to conclude, let's hear the parable for what it says. It starts with the familiar words, "For the kingdom of heaven is like." It's a kind of listen up, a signal that a story is coming that will unsettle and challenge its hearers. And yes, the shocking truth is right there. It's that in the kingdom of heaven, all are treated equally, whether they arrive early or late. There is no special treatment, no brownie points for hard work, no bonuses for meritorious behavior, or reward more than others for a life free of sin. All are invited, all are welcomed, and all will receive, as the landowner says, whatever is right. All are loved equally. It was surely unsettling for the disciples to hear these words then. Hadn't they already given up so much to follow Jesus? And it's unsettling for those of us in a first world church today. Don't we deserve more than those who showed up late, or who've given less, or prayed less, or worked less hard, or haven't even yet showed up at all? Surely we're entitled to more. No, says Jesus. In fact, it's just the opposite. The last will be first, and the first will be last. There's no such thing as entitlement in the vineyard, nor in the church, nor in the kingdom of heaven. No one is owed anything. For this parable reveals that in the kingdom of heaven we are all loved the same, unconditionally and infinitely. May it be so. Amen.